Everyone. Today we will discuss the novel Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Table of contents includes author's background, characters' characterization, settings, plot, moral lesson, and application of the novel.
Hello everyone, I am Lady Marie Duca from Desoe and I will be reporting about Robinson's Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. I will be discussing the author's background, character's characterization, and the setting of the novel. So, Robinson Crusoe, written by Daniel Defoe, is a novel that tells the story of a young and impulsive Englishman that defies his parents' wishes and takes to the sea seeking adventure. The young Robinson Crusoe is shipwrecked and cast away on a remote tropical island for 28 years. So, the author's background was about Daniel Defoe, who has born year 1660 and died year 1731. Defoe was a famous English writer of the 18th century. He wrote his world-famous novel, The Life and Strange, Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. When he was nearly 60 years old, or exactly 59 years old if I'm not be mistaken, first published in London in 1719, Defoe's first long work of fiction, and it introduced two of the most enduring characters in English literature, Robinson Crusoe and Prydie. The story of Robinson Crusoe was based on the real adventure of a sailor called Alexander Selkirk, who had lived alone for 4 years on a desert island. The book, however, also contains a lot of incidents from the author's imagination. When the book was published in 1719, it immediately became popular. Defoe made his story so realistic that everyone believed it. Defoe didn't write his book for children, but every children now knows about it. Robinson Crusoe, who lived 8 and 20 years all alone in an uninhabited island on the coast of America near the mouth of Great River of Orinoco, having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account how he was at last as strangely delivered by pirates. Daniel Defoe wrote many other books, but for Robinson Crusoe, he is called the father of English prose. So, as it said, the novel Robinson Crusoe was written by Daniel Defoe and it was first published on April 25, 1719 to be exact. The first edition credited the work's protagonist Robinson Crusoe as its author, leading many readers to believe he was a real person and the book a travelogue of true incidents. So the first or the original title of Robinson Crusoe was so long, and it was The Little and Strange Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe of York Mariner, who lived 8 and 20 years all alone in an uninhabited island on the coast of America near the mouth of the great river of Orinoco, having been cast on shore by shipwreck, wherein all the men perished but himself, with an account how he was at last as strangely delivered by pirates. The language of this novel was English, and the genre is adventure historical fiction. The publisher was William Taylor, and the publication date was 25 April 1719, or 302 years ago. Despite its simple narrative style, Robinson Crusoe was well received in the literary world and is often credited as marking the beginning of realistic fiction as a literary genre. It is generally seen as a contender for the first English novel. Before the end of 1719, the book had already run through four editions, and it has gone on to become one of the most widely published books in history, spawning so many imitations not only in literature but also in film, television, and radio that its name is used to define a genre, the Robinsonade. Next one is the character's characterization of the novel Robinson Crusoe. The information are all stated at the PowerPoint presentation, so to make it short, I will explain it briefly one by one. First is the main character, Robinson Crusoe, the narrator of the novel, who gets shipwrecked. Next is Freedie. A, next is Freedie, a Caribbean tribesman who Crusoe saves from cannibalism and subsequently named Freedie. He becomes a servant and friend to Crusoe. Then next, the Portuguese sea captain rescues Crusoe after he escapes from slavery and later helps him with his money and plantation. Next, the Spaniard, a man rescued by Crusoe who later helps him escape the island. Next is Suri, a servant to Crusoe after they escape slavery from the captain of the rover together. He is later given to the Portuguese sea captain as an indentured servant. Next one is the widow, friend to Crusoe who looks over his assets while he is away. Next one is Robinson Crusoe's father, a merchant named Nair. Next, captain of the rover, Moorish pirate of sail who captures and enslaves Crusoe. Next, traitorous crew members, members of a mutinied ship who appear towards the end of the novel. And the last one, the savages, cannibals that come to Crusoe's island and who represents a threat to Crusoe's religious and moral convictions as well as his own safety. And the last one is the setting of the novel Robinson's Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. The story begins in mid-17th century York with a brief account of Robinson Crusoe's early years. From there, it moves to the Moorish port of Sale, where Crusoe is imprisoned after his capture by pirates, and then to Brazil, where he sets up a planter after his escape from his Brazilian plantation. Crusoe sets out on an African voyage that ends in shipwreck. The sole survivor, Crusoe lives his next 28 years on a desert island. Situated off the South American coast, Crusoe's new home is a small, hilly island populated only by wild animals and birds. Crusoe is unfamiliar with most of the terrain's luxuriant vegetation, but he finds sugarcane and tobacco plants, melon and grapevines, and fruits trees, and citrus trees rather, on a journey to the far side of the island. He sees a nearby landmass that he is unable to identify, in stark contrast to the teeming city where Crusoe was born and raised. The island is an unspoiled paradise, an example of untamed nature. So to make it clear and to end this video report, the setting of Robinson's Crusoe begins his journey in September 1659 and travels to Africa, Brazil, and Lost Island in Atlantic. He moves primarily through the around the Atlantic Ocean. In this sense, the settings of the novel is a transatlantic one. The significance of this setting is that it's also the primary location of 18th century trade routes, including the slave trade. So, an additional info, the slave trade is the trading of slaves way back then. I don't recall what the year to be exact, but it was the just like I said a while ago, the trading of slaves.
Now I will discuss the plot summary of the novel Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. The plot includes the introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and the denouement. First is the introduction. Robinson Crusoe was born in the year 1632 in the city of York, England. He is the youngest son of his parents. This is why Crusoe's father wants him to study law, but young, younger Crusoe wants to become a sea merchant. While his parents talking about his wish to go to sea, he heard his father said to his mother, "That boy might be happy if he would stay at home, but if he gets abroad, he will be the most miserable wretch that ever was born." Despite hearing this, Robinson is determined, and even though his parents, especially his father, restrain from it, he disobeys his parents and decides to seek adventure and fortune at sea. And this is the rising action. At the age of 19 on September 1, 1651, Robinson Crusoe had his first voyage to London with his friend without the consent of his parents. Robinson Crusoe had a profitable first merchant voyage, and he leaved the £200 to the captain's widow for safekeeping. On his next voyage, the ship approached the Canary Islands, a Turkish rover out of Sally. Their ship was pirated and Robinson was captured and became a personal slave of the master. Thankfully, when the master asked him to catch a fish, he managed to escape with the help of Suri. Later on, Suri became his servant, and along their way they met a Portuguese captain. that helped them. However, he sold Surrey to the Portuguese captain, and the captain helped him to have a plantation in Brazil. And when his plantation is slowly growing and he needs some workers in his plantation, he prepares for a slave gathering expedition. This expedition became unsuccessful because they were shipwrecked and he was brought by the sea to an uninhabited island near Trinidad. He was the only survivor from the ship, so before the ship breaks up and sinks, he managed to get foods, guns, gunpowder, and anything that can be useful for him. And on his first day to the island, he begins to keep a record of time by erecting a cross and cutting notches in it, one for every day that passes from the 1st September of 1659. And he also created a daily journal to track his day and to write his daily activities in the island. And Robinson builds a fence to protect himself from the wild animals. He also creates a tent and a cave for food storage. Suddenly, after months of staying in the island, he fell ill, and this illness brought him to had a religious experience. And he read a Bible, and while reading the Bible, there's a words that keep running on his mind, and this is, all these things have not brought thee to repentance. When he read these words, he began to reflect to his visions, and from that day he explores at the island, and he created a boat to explore more the island. He tames a goat and milks them and make cheese. He also builds a small boat and to journey around the island. And he also captured a parrot and he teaches it to speak in English. He was delighted to have a parrot because after a long months of staying along the island, he have now a parrot to talk to. It became his like a friend because he can talk to parrot. And he also learns to make a pot, a basket, and even an umbrella. He also create a clothes from the goat skin. And he done all of this because he, of his great perseverance and his creativity and hard work. And after a long year of staying at the island alone, he begins to feel at peace with himself and his surroundings, and he now sees himself as king of the island. And now we are in the climax. While walking at the island, Robinson Crusoe found a footprint in the island. When he saw the footprint, he was thunderstruck and felt frightened because after a long year of staying along the island, this is the only time that he saw a footprint, and he didn't see any sign that there is a person in the island. So, because he was frightened, he he retired to his small fortress and he did not make a noise because he feared that someone might hear him. So the other day, he tried to measure his foot and the footprint, and there he was sure that the footprint is not in his, and there is other person in the island. And when he make an adventure in the island, he discovers skull, bones, handprints, and remains of people that was eaten by the cannibals. So this because he was frightened, he didn't fire a gun, he didn't make a fire, or he didn't make a noise because he was frightened that the cannibals might hear him and eat him. And when the cannibals arrived again, he managed to release one of the victims, and he called it Friday because he rescued it in the day Friday, and he teaches Friday to speak in English, and he also introduced him into Christianity. And Robinson teaches him everything that is useful, like planting barley and harvesting it, making pots, baskets, and everything. And after months, the cannibals return again, and this time they have two more victims, which later on, after Robinson and Friday save the two victims, they discover that one of them is Friday's father and the other one is an Spaniard. And Robinson welcomes these two new members of his community. And next is the falling action. The four of them, the Spaniard, Robinson Crusoe, Friday, and Friday's father, made a plan of leaving the island. And after 8 days, an English ship arrives off the island and a group of men came and they have the prisoners. And Robinson releases the prisoners and he discovered that one of them is the captain of the ship. So he managed to confuse the mutineers and tells them that, that this island is an imperial island and the governor will not allow them to leave unless they return to face their justice. And going to Denoma, finally, Robinson Crusoe left the island on December 19, 1686, after 28 years of staying in the uninhabited island. He arrived at England on June 11, 1687, but he discovers that almost of his relatives have died, including his parents. but the widow who, whom he trusted to keep his money is still alive. And also, he was informed from his friend in Lisbon that his plantation in Brazil became successful. So he sold his plantation and makes a considerable fortune from it. He donated some of the money to the widow, and and Robinson Crusoe visited again the island, and he finds that it was being well governed by the Spaniard and it became a prosperous colony. So at the end of the novel, Robinson Crusoe said that he seeks more of adventure because he always wants to have an adventure. And going to the and now I will discuss the moral lessons we can get through reading Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe and its application. First, we should work hard to make our lives better. Like what Robinson Crusoe did, he managed to build a home and secure it so he can protect himself from different wild animals. And also, he learned how to make pots, baskets, clothes, and different things that he needs. And because he put hard work learning these things, he make his life staying alone in the island better. Like in our life, if we put hard work in everything we do, we can change our social status in life. Second is we should be grateful when someone does a good deed to us. Like Friday, because Robinson Crusoe saves him from the carnivals, he remains grateful to Crusoe and did not leave Crusoe's side even though they already leave the island. Like in life, when someone did a good deed to us, even though it's just a small thing, we should be grateful and never forget what they did for us. Third is we should be loyal and faithful to our families or friends. Like the captain's widow and his friend from Lisbon and Robinson's friend from Lisbon. Even though Crusoe was gone for years, they remain faithful and loyal to Crusoe and they keep their money they keep Crusoe's money because maybe if it's someone else, they will already spend the money because Crusoe was gone for years. And it is in our life, we should always remain faithful and loyal to our families or partners even though they are they are far away from us. The fourth one is we should remain brave even when things are difficult or scary. Like when Robinson Crusoe saved Friday, even though he's afraid to cannibals, he he still saved Friday and Crusoe managed to live in the island alone. And in our life, we cannot avoid difficulties because it is part of our life. So we must always remain brave and always ready to face these challenges. Next is we should always have faith to God. Like Robinson Crusoe, even though he feels that hopeless because he had faith to God, it became his strength to survive alone in the island. And lastly, we should always live peaceful despite having different races. Like Friday and Robinson Crusoe, even though they have different races and they act differently, Crusoe became friends to Friday because in our life we cannot avoid meeting people that have different races from us. So we should always connect to them, and that's the moral lessons we can get in Robinson Crusoe's by Daniel Defoe. And that's all, and thank you for listening.